Sometimes we make decisions in our life and we see results immediately. And at the same time, some decisions we make, we never truly know the outcome. So the story that I'm going to share with you is amazing from an eternal perspective. It goes to show you that you never truly know the outcome of a seed that's planted inside of someone's heart. Now, this story is a story full of faith and tragedy about a missionary couple from Scandinavia in the early 1900s that God called to Africa to share the gospel to a remote village. So this is a story that's very beautiful because even though it has tragedy, the plot change at the end is going to be so amazing. Now, this is a wonderful story about a little girl named Aggie. Back in 1921, there was a missionary couple from Sweden by the name of David and Sylvia Flood. They had a 2-year-old son named David Jr., and they felt the call of God to go to a remote part of Africa. So they met another young couple from Scandinavia called the Ericsons. So they decided to come together and to pray for direction for their lives. So after much time and prayer, they all came into agreement and had said, hey, yes, God is calling us to the heart of Africa to go preach the gospel. And so they decided to go by faith to an area which was at that time called the Belgian Congo. So for 2 years, they tried to find a place to settle, and all of the locals were hostile to them being there. So they finally found a place right outside a city called Nadalera. Now, there was a chief who was responsible for a village in that region, and he made it clear that they were not to come in contact with any of the people who lived there, and they were not allowed to come into the city. So this was very difficult because they felt the call to reach an area in Africa, but nobody would talk to them. So in time, after they started to get settled, the chief allowed one little boy to come from the village once per week to sell like eggs and chicken. And this was the only point of contact that they had with the outside world. Now, Sylvia Flood was a very short woman of about 4'8", but she said, if this little boy is the only person that I have to talk to, I'm going to give my very best and I'm going to believe that God can touch his life. Now, both missionary couples were praying for spiritual breakthrough, but they were seeing none. Now, in time, Sylvia developed a relationship with a little boy who would come once per week, and he gave his heart to Jesus. So this was a huge breakthrough for Sylvia, but at this moment, malaria was very bad. And see, people in the nearby villages, they were dying one after the other. And they were far away from the village, and they were not allowed any communication with the world outside, so they could only hear what the little boy would tell for them. And I believe this instilled some fear inside of the Ericsons, and they said, hey, David, Sylvia, I'm sorry, but we made a mistake coming here, and so we're going to go back to the outpost. You guys are on your own. So then David and Sylvia had to make a decision. Are they going to continue with the mission that God called them to do? Or are they going to turn around and go back home? So Joel and Bertha Erickson, they said their goodbyes and they went back to the outpost. Now, Sylvia was not feeling very well, and she discovered that in the heart of Africa, in the middle of the primitive wilderness, she was now pregnant. Now remember, the only point of contact they had was that one little boy that they just won to Jesus. They were outcast to the villages there. There was no modern medicine, and the Ericsons had just left. So it was a very difficult pregnancy, and Sylvia discovered that she also had malaria. So the chief had compassion in his heart right at the moment before she was going to give birth, and he sent someone from the village, a midwife, to assist in the birth of the child. Now, this was an excruciating birth. It was very long, and it was so hard on Sylvia that she almost passed away. Now, they were very excited and happy the moment the baby was born, because they gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and they named her Aina Cecilia Flood. And so this beautiful baby girl just came into the world, and they were so happy. But things would quickly turn for the worst. Only 17 days after Sylvia Flood gave birth, she passed away. Inside David Flood, something changed. He snapped, and in a fit of rage, he dug a grave, buried his 27-year-old wife. He took his 2 children. He went back down the mountain to the mission station, and there he was greeted by the Ericksons. And he said, look, I need you to take care of my daughter. I can't take care of her. I'm going back to Sweden. God has ruined my life. And with that, he headed for the port, rejecting not only his calling, but God himself. Within 8 months, the Ericksons caught a mysterious disease, and they passed away within a few days of each other. Now, the baby was then turned over to an American missionary couple, and they adjusted her Swedish name from Aina to Aggie. And eventually, they brought her back to the United States at the age of 3. So this family, the Bergs, were so excited to have Aggie because they were childless that they were afraid that if they tried to travel back to Africa, that there could be some sort of legal obstacle that would separate them from her. So they decided to stay in their home country and to switch from missionary work to pastoral work. And so this is how Aggie grew up in South Dakota. So as a young woman, she attended North Central Bible College in Minneapolis, and there she met and married a young man named Aggie Hurst. So years went by, and the Hurst enjoyed a fruitful ministry, and Aggie gave birth first to a daughter, then a son, and in time, her husband became president of a Christian college in the Seattle area, and Aggie was intrigued to find so much Scandinavian heritage there. So one day, a Swedish religious magazine ended up in her mailbox, and Aggie was shocked but very intrigued. And she was looking through the magazine, and she stopped when she saw this picture. It was a primitive picture, and in the picture was a white cross, and there were the words Sylvia Flood. So Aggie jumped in her car. She went straight away to a local college and spoke to a friend of hers and said, can you please translate this article for me? So the instructor summarized the story, and this is what he said. He said it was about missionaries who came to Nadalera a long time ago, and there was a birth of a white baby. There was the death of a young mother. There was one little African boy who had been led to Christ, and how after the whites had left, the boy had grown up and finally persuaded the chief to let him build a school in the village. Now the article said that gradually he won all of the students to Christ. Now the children led their parents to Christ, and even that chief had become a Christian. So today there were 600 Christian believers in one village, and it was all because of the sacrifice of David and Sylvia Flood. For the Hurst 25th wedding anniversary, the college actually presented them with a gift, which was a vacation to Sweden. So there Aggie sought to find her real father. Now he was an old man, and David Flood had remarried. He fathered 4 more children, and he had generally dissipated his life with alcohol. He became very resentful. He suffered from a stroke. He was still bitter, and he had one rule in his family: never mention the name of God, because God took everything from me. So after an emotional reunion with her half-brothers and her half-sister, Aggie brought up the subject about seeing her father. And they were very direct when they told Aggie. They said, look, Aggie, you can talk to him, but whatever you do, do not mention the name of God. I know he's very ill, but if you mention God, anytime he hears the name of God, he goes into a rage. So the moment Aggie walked into that apartment and she looked at her father after all those years, there he lay, 73 years old, liquor bottles are everywhere, he's dying, he's got cataracts on his eyes, and she looks at him with love and she says, Papa, and he looks toward her and he says, Aina, I never meant to give you away. And she said, Papa, it's all right, God took care of me. Now in that moment, the tears dried up. Now, David Flood did not go into a rage, but he was very clear, and he said, God forgot all of us. Our lives have been like this because of him. And he turned his face back to the wall. So Aggie stroked his face and then continued without any hesitation. She said, Papa, I've got a story to tell you. It's a true one. You didn't go to Africa in vain. Mama did not die in vain. the little boy that you won to the Lord, grew up and made a school and won the whole village to Jesus Christ. The one seed that you planted has continued to grow, and today there are 600 African people serving the Lord because you were faithful to the call of God in your life. Papa, Jesus loves you, and He has never hated you. This is powerful. So David looked to his daughter's eyes, and he gave his heart back to Jesus Christ. Now, over the next few days, they enjoyed conversations together and moments together. And then Aggie said that her husband soon had to return back to America. And then a few weeks later, David Flood passed away. A few years later, the Hursts were attending a high-level evangelism conference in London, England. And there was a report that was given about the nation of Zaire, which was the former Belgian Congo. So the superintendent of the national church, he represented more than 110,000 baptized believers, and he spoke about the gospel that was spread in his nation. Now, Aggie could not help but to go to him afterward and to ask him the question if he had ever heard of David and Sylvia Flood. He said, "Yes, madam." He said, "It was Sylvia Flood who led me to Jesus Christ. I was the boy that brought you food to your parents before you were born. In fact, to this day, your mother's grave and her memory are honored by all of us." He embraced her with a long hug, and he continued and said, "You have got to come to Africa to see, because your mother is the most famous person in our history." And in time, that's exactly what Aggie and her husband did. And they were welcomed by cheering villagers, and she even met the man that had carried her back down the mountain years ago, right after her mother passed away. Now, it was a special moment when a pastor took Aggie to the side of her mother's grave, and she saw with her own eyes that white cross that read the words, Sylvia Flood. Now, later that day in church, a pastor read from John 12:24. It says, "I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." He then followed with Psalm 126:5. "Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy." So this is an amazing story from an eternal perspective about the power of a seed. So you never know what you do in your life. You may never actually see the results, but it could have an eternal perspective. I thank you for listening to this story about Aggie Hurst, and please like and subscribe to this channel for more content like this, and share this video with someone that needs to see this. Have a great day. This is Tyler Wrenn with Supernatural Stories.